My grandpa's entitled children hid his death from us. Now they're trying to keep my grandma from her own husband's funeral. My grandfather died when I was just a baby. When I was older, my Nana married a new man, a widower, who I called Grandpa John. He was the only maternal grandfather I knew, so I considered him my family. I didn't know this during the decade I knew him, but his kids from his previous marriage did not feel the same about my Nana. They did not believe in remarriage and considered her the most evil person in history for tempting their father from his vows to their deceased mother. They refused to see him in the home that my Nana owned, so when he got older and had difficulty leaving the house on his own, they mostly just stopped seeing him for years. He had never mentioned his kids, so I knew nothing about them. Eventually, he started getting bad enough that prolonged hospital stays were getting more frequent, and he needed to be in and out of full-time care. Whenever he was in the hospital, she would visit him until he could return home. They had been snowbirds, spending winters in Arizona and summers in Ohio, but because of his health, they had not been able to go to their Arizona home in many years. They decided that she would go down for a week or two to make sure the home was okay, and start the process of selling it before its value dropped from lack of maintenance while he was safely in full-time care with staff they had known and trusted for years. Then they could use the money from the sale for his care. I went to visit him the day after he left, to make sure he was doing okay. His son and daughter were there. It was the first time I had ever seen them. I had barely even been aware of their existence, but I figured out who they were from context. I said hello and tried to introduce myself. They pretended as though I was invisible, and they hadn't heard anything. Like a child would do during a game when they pretend a sibling is a ghost. I awkwardly sat in a chair. They proceeded to stand there for over an hour, talking right in front of me to Grandpa John about how evil my Nana was. That she would abandon him in some dirty hospital, it was actually quite nice, and run off spending all his money partying in Arizona like a gold-digging hussy. And how they hoped he would remember that when it came to his will. It should be noted that my Nana, while by no means wealthy, had a lot more money than he did, and all of their property was hers from decades before she ever met him. She was also an elderly woman with a knee replacement who used a walker. You know, the kind with yellow tennis balls on the legs, so she was in no conditioning to be partying in Phoenix or whatever they thought she was doing. He never once responded. He just stared straight ahead with glazed eyes. I wasn't sure if he even heard anything. He was not looking very well, but I knew he always had his ups and downs. So I didn't imagine anything was unusual. I was flabbergasted. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up. But I was a teenager, in a hospital room full of sick and dying people, and I didn't know how to fight back without causing a huge scene. Eventually, I just took a brief pause in their rant to stand up and tell Grandpa John that I had to go, and that we all loved him and his wife would be home soon after she took care of the house issues. The entitled son and daughter spoke to me for the first time, telling me I didn't need to come back because they would be there for him, and I was not his family. I rushed to my parents' house and told them what had happened, and they filled me in on their issues. And it seemed like even if they seemed awful, I knew it wasn't my place to try and keep them from their father. So I stayed away, and gave them time to catch up and hoped that when I wasn't there, they could actually catch up and figure out their relationship. A few days later, my Nana got a very strange call from the hospital. A nurse that she knew very well from Grandpa John's hospital called her and asked how she was. Nana said fine. The nurse then awkwardly asked, "Do you know?" My Nana asked, "No what?" And the woman broke down. Grandpa John had been dead for 24 hours. His son and daughter had forbidden the hospital from contacting my Nana, and said they would let everyone know about the funeral arrangements. I have no idea what weird loophole caused higher-ups at the hospital to follow along with this, but his nurse sensed something was up and took a risk of calling to make sure my Nana knew. She did not. None of us did. They were attempting to hide his death and hurriedly hold a funeral before any of us found out. The nurse let us know where and when the funeral was taking place. Nana called all of us on the way to the airport to let us know. We started the phone tree for our whole family, and soon after she was back and we were all on our way to the funeral. The look of rage and disgust we got when we walked into my own grandpa's funeral, that my Nana got for walking into her own husband's funeral, was terrifying. They glared angrily and you could see that they wanted to scream and throw us out, but decided not to cause a scene. Instead, his daughter walked up and grabbed a fruit basket off the table. She announced that she was putting it in her car, and if any of her guests wanted fruit, they could ask her and she would go to the car to get it. Because she didn't want just anyone eating her fruit. The son and daughter gave speeches about how their father was finally in heaven, back with his one true love, their mother, and finally free from those who tried to tear their love apart. The staff of the funeral home eventually clued into the weird dynamic and found a way to put my Nana's car in the front of the procession when neither of Grandpa John's kids were looking, just to give her a brief moment of respect. She was pissed, but there was nothing she could do. These people thought their own opinions on the definition of "till death do us part" entitled them to hide my Nana's husband's death from her, hold their own funeral, and surely they spent days pressuring their father to cut her out of his will. I wish I could have seen their faces when they found out that none of the property they were salivating over was owned by him. It was a terrible, painful day for her to have to fight her way into her own husband's funeral. I was very sad, but I could not help but laugh at the fruit basket thing. It just came out automatically. It was the saddest, most petty, most evilly pathetic power grab I had ever seen.